This Western actress was so hot, they tried to ban her movie for excessive cleavage. Another slapped John Wayne for real, and one of them did her own stunts in a corset and high heels. These are the hottest Western movie stars in Hollywood's history. Dorothy Malone spent the 40s and 50s dominating the B-Western scene. She was everywhere. And early on, the studios were really pushing that all-American girl image. She did a string of solid Westerns during that time. She starred with Joel McCrea in South of St. Louis and Colorado Territory, which, by the way, was actually a Western remake of the gangster classic High Sierra. She also worked with Randolph Scott on The Nevadan and Tall Man Riding. That was her zone, reliable, grounded, and always working. But things changed when she hit those big melodramas in the mid-50s. Douglas Sirk cast her in Written on the Wind and The Tarnished Angels, and that's where Malone completely reinvented herself. She went from playing the sweet girl next door to this icy, complex femme fatale, and won an Oscar for Written on the Wind, supporting actress, and she earned every bit of it. After that breakthrough, she came back to Westerns but brought something different. More edge, more presence. You can see it in Warlock and The Last Sunset. She'd leveled up. Between film and TV, Dorothy Malone racked up 20 Western roles. That's serious longevity. Jane Russell's career launched with a scandal. Her first movie ever was Howard Hughes' The Outlaw, and it caused an absolute meltdown at the production code office. The issue was too much cleavage. The censors wouldn't approve it for 2 years. Howard Hughes pushed back hard, and eventually the film got released in 1943. Just like that, Jane Russell became one of the most famous sex symbols of the decade. In The Outlaw, she played Rio McDonald, caught in the middle of this wildly fictional love triangle between Pat Garrett, Doc Holliday, and Billy the Kid. It was a mess of a movie in a lot of ways, but it made her iconic. She didn't stop with just one Western either. She leaned into the genre, especially in comedy. She co-starred with Bob Hope in The Paleface and Son of Paleface, and The Paleface ended up in Steven Schneider's 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. That's not nothing. Out of her 33 film and TV credits, 10 of them were Westerns. She always brought charisma, confidence, and star power. Between 1948 and 1950, Joanne Dru delivered one of the strongest 3-film runs in Western history. She went from Broadway to big screen fast, and by her second film, she was already working with Howard Hawks. That second film was Red River, where she played Tess Millay, the woman who ends up bridging the rift between John Wayne and Montgomery Clift. That movie's not just a classic, it's one of the first 50 inducted into the National Film Registry. The American Film Institute ranked it as the 5th best American Western ever made. After that, she worked with John Ford on She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and Wagon Master, which Ford actually said was one of his 3 favorite films he ever made. Dru didn't stick to one type either. She could play strong, vulnerable, romantic, grounded, whatever the role needed. And she always looked like she belonged out there on the frontier. She brought something natural to every scene, something unpolished but magnetic. All in all, she logged 12 Western roles between film and TV. Most people remember Stagecoach as the film that launched John Wayne. But when that movie came out, Wayne wasn't even a name yet. Claire Trevor was the top-billed star. She already had an Oscar nomination under her belt for Dead End, and by the time Stagecoach hit theaters, she was the one pulling the weight. Trevor played Dallas, a role that basically set the template for the prostitute with a heart of gold character that Westerns would recycle again and again. That performance wasn't just strong, it was defining. She brought dignity, depth, and just the right amount of steel to a role that could have easily been flattened out in someone else's hands. She didn't stop there. Through the 40s and 50s, Trevor kept returning to the genre. Dark Command, The Stranger Wore a Gun, Man Without a Star, all solid Westerns that proved she had range and presence. Outside of Westerns, she went full force into film noir and ended up winning an Oscar for her performance in Key Largo. Katy started out in Mexico's golden age of cinema, made a name for herself in films like The Brute, and eventually caught Hollywood's attention. Her first big role in the States was in High Noon, where she absolutely held her own next to Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly. She won a Golden Globe for it, first Latin American actress to ever do that. She also picked up a nomination for Most Promising Newcomer and a Laurel nod. A couple of years later, she showed up in Broken Lance and earned an Oscar nomination. Again, the first Latin American actress to be nominated for an Academy Award. She kept that momentum going with roles in The Badlanders, One-Eyed Jacks, and Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Out of her 86 film and TV credits, 18 of them were westerns. Dale Evans had a life that sounded like a movie. Married at 14, a mother by 15, and abandoned by 16. She clawed her way into showbiz as a big band radio singer, got a contract with 20th Century Fox, and then starred opposite Roy Rogers in Cowboy and the Senorita. That film changed everything. From there, she and Rogers became one of the genre's biggest duos. They made nearly 30 films together between 1944 and 1951, most of them Western musicals. They got married in 47, stayed together for more than 50 years, and built an entire brand around their partnership. In the 50s, they jumped to TV with The Roy Rogers Show, which ran for 6 solid seasons. And in 1976, Dale Evans was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers. Country Music Television later named her one of the top 40 greatest women in country music. Across film and television, she showed up in 33 westerns. That's why they didn't just call her a co-star, they called her the Queen of the West. Most people remember Jean Arthur as the queen of screwball comedies. That distinct voice, the timing, the energy, she owned that space. But what usually gets overlooked is how important she was to the Western genre. Before she ever did a comedy, Arthur was already riding through dusty backlots in silent B-movie westerns. Between 1924 and 1929, she showed up in nearly 25 of them. And when the talkies rolled in, she didn't leave the West behind. She played Calamity Jane in The Plainsman, which the American Film Institute later nominated for their list of greatest westerns. And then came Shane, her final film role, a cornerstone of the genre and still one of the most influential westerns ever made. AFI called it the third greatest western in American film history. The Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry. Maureen O'Hara wasn't just known for playing strong women, they called her the Queen of Technicolor, and it fits, bold, fiery, and impossible to ignore on screen, especially when she was paired with John Wayne. She was the only actress Wayne ever truly respected. The two first teamed up in Rio Grande, the last chapter in John Ford's Cavalry trilogy. That kicked off one of the most iconic screen partnerships in Hollywood history. Their most famous Western together was McClintock, a 1963 Western comedy where O'Hara didn't just match Wayne's energy, she did her own stunts while in corsets and heels. This was the golden age of Hollywood, and most actresses let stunt doubles do the dangerous stuff. O'Hara didn't. She kept going right into the 70s, starring opposite Wayne one last time in Big Jake. After that, she stepped away from movies for 2 decades, before finally coming back in 1991. Barbara Stanwyck stepped into the genre in 1935 with Annie Oakley, playing the legendary sharpshooter. Just 4 years later, she starred in Union Pacific, a massive hit that went on to win the Palme d'Or at the first Cannes Film Festival. Then came the 50s, and this is where it gets interesting. The Furies and 40 Guns weren't just strong entries, they were early signals of where the Western was headed. They had grit, complexity, and showed that women could lead Westerns just as fiercely as the men. Later on, Stanwyck moved to TV with The Big Valley, and she dominated there too. She won an Emmy, picked up 2 more nominations, and got 3 Golden Globe nods for that role alone. In 1973, she was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers. Across her career, she did 107 film and television roles, and 16 of those were Westerns.